They are no longer in your life the way they used to be, but something about them still occupies a room inside your mind. That is the part that feels difficult to explain. From the outside, life appears to have moved on. The conversations have stopped. The distance is visible. The chapter seems closed enough for other people to assume you should be past it by now. Days continue. Work continues. The world does not pause just because one connection changed shape. Yet internally, the story still breathes. A memory appears in the middle of an ordinary moment. One detail brings back a whole atmosphere. A place reminds you of a version of yourself you have not felt in a while. Their name may not be spoken, but the mind still finds ways to return. It does not always return with dramatic pain. Sometimes it returns quietly, almost politely, as if it is only checking whether the door is still open. And somehow it is. This is why the attachment can feel so confusing. The person may be gone, but the inner relationship continues. You are not speaking to them, yet part of you is still responding to them. You are not waiting in any obvious way, yet some hidden part of your attention remains turned in their direction. You may be living in the present with your body, while your mind keeps visiting a place that no longer exists. That split creates exhaustion, because healing does not begin when someone leaves your life. Healing begins when the version of them inside your mind starts losing its authority. At first, that version can feel more powerful than the real person ever was. The real person had limits. They had moods, contradictions, fears, flaws, inconsistencies, and moments where they could not meet you the way you hoped. Reality showed you more than one side of them. But the mind does something strange after loss. It does not always preserve the whole person. It preserves the emotional imprint, the look that stayed with you, the conversation that made you feel understood, the possibility that seemed to open around them, the warmth of a moment before everything became complicated. Over time, those fragments can become larger than the full truth. So when you think about them, you may not be returning to the person as they actually were. You may be returning to the feeling they once gave you. The difference matters. A person is real. A feeling can become a world. The person may have been unclear, distant, unavailable, or inconsistent, but the feeling remains smooth inside memory. It does not interrupt you. It does not leave you waiting. It does not fail to answer. It does not repeat the same painful pattern. It simply waits inside you, glowing with the meaning you gave it. That is often what the mind refuses to release. Not only the person, the atmosphere, the imagined future, the version of yourself that seemed to exist around them. Maybe with them, you felt more alive. Maybe you felt chosen after a long season of feeling unseen. Maybe their attention quieted an old fear. Maybe the connection gave shape to a hope you had not admitted you were carrying. When something like that disappears, the pain reaches deeper than the relationship itself. You are not only missing what happened, you are missing what their presence seemed to promise. This is where many people misunderstand their own suffering. They look at the situation and think, why am I still affected? Why does this person still take up space in my mind? Why can't I just move on? Those questions often create shame, and shame makes the wound more private. The mind starts treating grief like a weakness, as if deep attachment proves something embarrassing. But the problem is not that you cared. The problem begins when caring turns into captivity. There is nothing shameful about missing someone who mattered. A meaningful connection leaves traces. Certain people enter your life and awaken parts of you that had been quiet for years. They make you feel seen, wanted, understood, or possible again. Losing that can hurt deeply. Still, there is a line you have to notice. On one side of that line is grief. On the other side is imprisonment. Grief honors what was real. Imprisonment keeps rebuilding what is no longer available. Grief allows sadness to move through you. Imprisonment keeps asking the past to become different before your life is allowed to continue. Grief admits this mattered. Imprisonment turns that meaning into a chain. The Stoics cared about this distinction because they understood that the mind does not suffer only from events, it suffers from the meanings it attaches to them. Epictetus wrote, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." The absence may hurt, but the judgment attached to that absence can make the hurt unbearable. If their silence becomes proof that you were not enough, the pain deepens. When their leaving becomes evidence that you are difficult to love, the wound becomes personal. Once the ending is interpreted as the loss of your only chance at happiness, the present begins to feel like a place of punishment. The event is already painful. The story built around it can become even heavier. That is why you have to look carefully at what your mind is holding. It may seem as if you are holding on to them, but often you are holding on to a meaning about your worth, a meaning about what the connection proved, a meaning about who you were when they cared, a meaning about what life could have become if they had stayed. This is not easy to see while the heart is still attached. Attachment protects its own story. It gathers evidence. It revisits old details. It keeps certain memories close and lets others fade. It turns uncertainty into possibility and possibility into hope. Before long, the mind is not simply remembering a person. It is defending an entire inner world. And that inner world can become very persuasive. It tells you there must be one more answer somewhere, one more sign, one more interpretation, one more hidden truth that will finally make the ending feel less final. So the mind returns again and again to old conversations, old silences, old moments where something seemed unfinished. But the past does not change because you keep visiting it. A memory can be entered many times, but it cannot be edited by longing. You can imagine a better sentence, a softer ending, a clearer confession, a different choice from them or from yourself. None of it returns the moment to your hands. The mind may work all night, but reality remains exactly where it is. This is one reason attachment becomes so tiring. It demands effort from you while giving you no actual power. You think, analyze, remember, imagine, compare, and wait. The body continues moving through the day, but the deeper attention remains tied to what cannot be reached. Life becomes divided between what is happening now and what the mind keeps trying to recover. That division is where the present begins to lose color. Food tastes less full. Work feels more mechanical. Friends speak, but part of your attention is elsewhere. Even rest becomes difficult because quiet gives the memory more space to speak. The person is absent from the room, yet their absence organizes the room. No one should have that much power inside you. Not because they were meaningless, because your life is still yours. A person can matter without becoming the center of your inner universe. A connection can change you without owning your future. A memory can remain tender without becoming a command. The past can have a place in you without taking the place of everything else. This is the beginning of freedom. Not erasing them, but seeing clearly what they have become inside your mind. Perhaps they are no longer only a person. Perhaps they have become a symbol of being chosen, a symbol of a future that almost arrived, a symbol of a version of yourself that felt more alive, softer, safer, or less alone. If that is true, then the longing is not random. It is pointing towards something deeper. Do not ignore that. But do not worship it either. The deeper need must be understood, not handed permanently to someone who is no longer present. If you miss feeling seen, that matters. If you miss feeling safe, that matters. If you miss feeling hopeful, that matters. But the answer cannot be to place your whole inner life at the feet of one absent person. That would turn a human being into a source of salvation. And no human being can carry that role without eventually breaking something in you. The Stoic path is not coldness. It is not emotional denial. It does not ask you to pretend the connection meant nothing. A colder person might say, "Forget them. They are gone." But that kind of advice is too shallow for a wound that has roots. Forgetting is not the first task. Seeing is. See what the attachment is made of. See the difference between the real person and the inner image. See what the memory gives you when the present feels empty. See which part of your worth became tied to their attention. See how much of your life has been waiting for an answer that may never arrive. This kind of seeing may hurt at first. Most honest things do. Yet there is relief inside it too, because once you understand that you are not only holding on to a person, the work becomes more precise. You stop attacking yourself for missing them and begin asking what the longing is trying to protect. Maybe it protects you from grief. Maybe it protects you from admitting that the future you imagined will not arrive in that form. Maybe it protects you from returning to yourself and finding parts of your life that were neglected while your attention lived around them. That is painful, but it is also useful. Pain that reveals a pattern can become a doorway. The question is whether you will walk through it or keep circling the memory. For now, begin with one honest recognition. They may be gone from your daily life, but your mind has kept a version of them alive. That version may feel comforting, painful, sacred, or unfinished. It may carry real memories, but it may also carry imagination, fear, idealization, and hope. Do not fight it blindly. Study it. Look at it without cruelty and without romance. Ask what it is asking from you. Ask what it keeps taking from you. Ask whether it is leading you toward clarity or keeping you emotionally loyal to what no longer meets you in reality. This is where the first shift begins. Not in forgetting, not in forcing yourself to stop feeling, not in pretending the past was empty. The shift begins when you realize that the person is not the only thing you need to release. There is also the story, the meaning, the imagined future, the edited memory, and the part of you that is still waiting for reality to become different. And once you see that clearly, the next truth becomes unavoidable. Some of the pain comes from loss, but some of it comes from resisting the loss. Some pain comes from losing someone. Another part comes from refusing to let the loss become real. That second pain is harder to notice because it often feels like love, loyalty, or unfinished understanding. You are not screaming at reality. You are not openly denying what happened. You may even admit, with your words, that the connection has changed or ended. But somewhere deeper, the mind is still negotiating. It keeps searching for an exception. Maybe the silence is temporary. Maybe the distance hides something tender. Maybe the ending only looks like an ending because neither of you has found the right words yet. Maybe one day the whole story will rearrange itself and prove that the waiting was not wasted. These thoughts can feel harmless at first. They soften the sharpness of finality. They make the absence less cold. They give the mind something to hold when the heart is not ready to stand in the open space left behind. But comfort is not always healing. Sometimes comfort is the form resistance takes when it has learned to speak gently. You can see this in the way the mind returns to the same questions. Why did it happen that way? What did they really feel? Did they mean what they said? Was there something you missed? Could one different sentence have changed the ending? The questions seem reasonable, and some of them may be worth asking once. The problem begins when asking becomes a place to live. At that point, the mind is no longer seeking understanding. It is trying to postpone acceptance. There is a difference between learning from the past and keeping the past on trial. Learning has an end. It gives you a clearer view of yourself, the other person, and the pattern between you. After that, it asks you to live differently. A trial, however, can continue forever. Every memory becomes evidence. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every detail is called back to the stand. The past is examined again and again, but no verdict brings peace. This is how resistance extends suffering. The first wound came from what happened. The repeated wound comes from demanding that what happened should somehow become different before you allow yourself to move. And reality does not respond to that demand. It remains where it is. This is one of the most difficult Stoic lessons, because it sounds simple until it touches the thing you still want. It is easy to speak about accepting reality in general. It becomes much harder when reality has taken the shape of someone's absence, someone's silence, or a future that will not arrive in the form you imagined. Epictetus advised, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." The strength of that sentence is not in pretending that the rest does not hurt. The strength is in knowing where your authority ends. You do not control whether someone returns with clarity. You do not control whether they understand the pain they left behind. You do not control whether their memory of the connection matches yours. You do not control whether they regret, explain, apologize, or choose differently. Those things belong to a territory outside your command. The mind may visit that territory constantly, but visiting does not make it yours. Thinking about what someone might do does not create power over what they will do. Replaying what happened does not hand you the ability to rewrite it. The only place your power remains alive is closer. It is in the way you meet the thought when it comes back. It is in the meaning you attach to their absence. It is in the discipline to stop turning unanswered questions into a daily ritual. It is in the decision to care for your life even while part of you still wishes reality had been kinder. That is not small power. It only feels small because attachment wants a different kind. Attachment wants the power to reverse, restore, convince, repair, and finally be chosen in the way it hoped. But wisdom often begins when you stop reaching for impossible power and return to the possible one. The possible one may not change the past, but it can change the way the past lives inside you. This is where acceptance is often misunderstood. Acceptance is not approval. It does not mean you are glad it happened. It does not mean the person treated you well, or that the ending was fair, or that your feelings were too much. It does not ask you to decorate disappointment with spiritual language. Acceptance is simply the end of the extra war. The event may still hurt, but you stop fighting its existence. The absence may still feel heavy, but you stop demanding that it prove something different. The memory may still return, but you stop treating it as an instruction to reopen the entire story. There is quiet dignity in that. Not the kind of dignity that looks impressive from the outside. No one may see this work. No one may praise you for not checking, not replaying, not entering the same fantasy, not searching for another hidden meaning. Yet each private refusal matters. Every time you stop feeding the argument with reality, something in you begins to stand more firmly in the present. At first, this may feel like loss all over again. Resistance had been keeping the story emotionally active. It gave the mind a task. It gave the heart a reason to keep looking backward. When you begin to release resistance, there can be a strange emptiness. The old questions are no longer allowed to fill every quiet space, and the silence underneath them may feel uncomfortable. Do not mistake that discomfort for a mistake. Sometimes the emptiness is not proof that you need to return to the old story. Sometimes it is the first space your life has had in a long time. Let the space exist. You do not have to rush to fill it with another fantasy, another explanation, or another attempt to make the ending less final. Stand there for a moment. Let reality be plain. Let the truth breathe without adding a second layer of argument over it. Something happened. It mattered. It hurt. It did not become what you wanted. And still your life is here. That is the sentence resistance does not want to hear. Your life is here. Not back there in the last conversation, not in the imagined return, not in the apology you may never receive, not in the version of the story where everything finally makes sense. Here, in the day that still needs you, in the body that has carried the grief, in the work that has waited for your attention, in the friendships, duties, habits, and quiet responsibilities that do not become less real because one person became absent. Resistance makes the past feel more alive than the present. Acceptance slowly reverses that. It does not happen through force. You do not wake up and command the heart to stop aching. The process is usually much quieter. A question appears, and you choose not to follow it all the way down. A memory returns, and you allow it to pass without building a home around it. A wave of longing moves through you, and instead of turning it into destiny, you let it be what it is, a wave. Painful but temporary, real but not sovereign. This is how you begin to live with the loss instead of living against it. The difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Living against the loss keeps you locked in a private protest. Living with it allows grief to become part of your story without becoming the whole story. One path drains you, the other eventually returns energy to you. The mind may resist this because it fears that acceptance will make the connection meaningless. It may believe that if you stop fighting for the past, you are betraying what was beautiful. But meaning does not require resistance. Something can matter deeply and still be over. Someone can shape you and still not belong to your future. A chapter can be real without being reopened forever. That is not betrayal, that is proportion. And proportion is one of the first signs that healing is beginning. The past returns to its proper size. The person becomes part of your life, not the center of your life. The memory remains, but it stops acting like a command. The pain is respected, but it no longer receives unlimited authority. This does not mean you will never think of them again. You probably will. There may be days when the old ache rises sharply. A place, a song, a season, or one small detail may pull the memory close. Healing does not remove every echo. It teaches you how to hear the echo without walking back into the empty room. That is enough for now. Do not demand perfect peace from yourself. Begin with honest peace. The kind that can admit, I still feel this, but I am no longer willing to argue with reality every day. The kind that can say, I wish it had been different, but I will not keep making my life wait for a past that cannot change. That is where strength becomes gentle. You are not forcing yourself to forget. You are releasing the fight that keeps the wound open. And once that fight begins to soften, another layer of the truth can appear. Because you were not only resisting the loss of what happened, you were also grieving the future your mind had already started building around them. A person can leave with more than their presence. Sometimes they leave with an entire future your mind had already begun to imagine. This is why the pain can feel larger than the facts. From the outside, someone might look at the situation and think it is simple. A connection ended. A person changed. A conversation stopped. Life must continue. But inside you, the ending may feel much wider than that, because you are not only facing what happened, you are facing everything that will now never happen. That invisible loss is difficult to explain. There are no photographs of it, no shared home, no years of memories, no obvious proof that something large was taken from you. Yet the grief is real, because the mind had already traveled ahead. It had already begun placing this person inside future moments. Not always consciously, not always dramatically, but quietly, naturally, almost without permission. One warm conversation becomes the possibility of many more. A rare feeling of being understood becomes the beginning of emotional safety. A moment of closeness starts to feel like a door opening. Before reality has made any promise, imagination begins arranging furniture inside a life that has not yet arrived. That is how attachment grows in the future tense. It is not only built from memories, it is also built from projections. The mind takes a few real moments and extends them forward. It wonders what things might become. It imagines how the connection could deepen, how the uncertainty might resolve, how the person might one day choose with more clarity. A path begins forming inside you before anyone has agreed to walk it. Then the connection changes. The message does not come. The warmth becomes inconsistent. Distance appears where certainty was hoped for. A person who once seemed like a beginning starts behaving like an ending. And suddenly you are not only grieving them, you are grieving the collapse of the world you had started building around them. This kind of grief can make you feel foolish. You may ask yourself why it hurts so much when some of it never fully existed. Why mourn conversations that never happened? Why miss a future that was never promised? Why feel the loss of a life that lived mostly inside imagination? But the heart does not only attach to what has already become real, it also attaches to what felt possible. Possibility can be powerful, sometimes even more powerful than reality, because reality has limits. Possibility has room. It can grow in any direction the mind needs. The person may have been uncertain, but the future imagined around them can still appear clear. The connection may have been inconsistent, but the dream of what it could become remains smooth. The actual relationship may have carried tension, but the imagined version knows how to resolve everything. That is why losing possibility can hurt with such strange force. You are not only saying goodbye to what was, you are being asked to release what your mind thought life was about to become. There may have been a version of yourself attached to that future too. A calmer version, a loved version, a more hopeful version. Perhaps with them you imagined yourself becoming softer, less guarded, less alone. Maybe their presence seemed to promise that a long season of emotional waiting had finally found its answer. When the connection fades, that version of yourself feels threatened as well. The grief becomes personal because the imagined future was not only about them, it was also about who you believed you could become with them near you. That is why an ending can feel like being pulled backward. You lose the person, then lose the direction. The days ahead no longer carry the same emotional shape. Plans that were never spoken still disappear. Hopes that were never announced still collapse. The mind looks forward and finds empty space where it had quietly placed expectation. This is one reason people keep returning to the past. The past is where the imagined future still feels alive. Inside a memory, nothing has collapsed yet. The warmth is still there. The look still carries meaning. The beginning still seems open. You can revisit a moment before reality narrowed the possibilities. For a few seconds, the story feels unfinished again, and unfinished stories are easier to hold than final ones. Finality has no negotiation inside it. Possibility does, so the mind keeps choosing possibility, even when reality has already withdrawn from it. It prefers the ache of imagining to the coldness of accepting. It revisits old scenes not only to remember what happened, but to stand again at the place where the future still looked available. Seneca warned that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. That line is usually applied to fear, but it belongs to longing as well. Imagination can extend grief beyond the actual event. It can create an entire life around what might have been, then make the present feel poor because it cannot compete with something that was never forced to become real. An imagined future has no bills, no conflict, no ordinary disappointments, no miscommunication, no tired days, no changing moods, no practical limits. It remains pure because it never had to live. Reality cannot compete with that purity. A real relationship must face timing, character, effort, fear, consistency, and the daily weight of being human. An imagined relationship only has to remain beautiful enough to keep you attached. It can be repaired instantly. It can be explained perfectly. It can make the person more ready, more honest, more available, more aware, more tender than they ever proved themselves to be. This is where grief becomes mixed with illusion. Not because your feelings were false, because the future you are mourning was partly built by longing. And longing is an artist. It fills empty spaces. It completes unfinished sentences. It turns a small sign into a promise and a brief closeness into destiny. It does not always ask whether the other person is actually building the same future. It only feels how much the future would mean if it were true. This is the painful question you eventually have to ask. Was this future shared, or was it mostly carried by me? The answer may not be simple. Perhaps there were real moments of mutual hope. Maybe the other person gave signals, warmth, words, or closeness that made your imagination understandable. You do not need to accuse yourself of inventing everything. Often, attachment grows because reality gave it enough material to begin. But beginning is not the same as building. A future requires more than emotional possibility. It requires participation, presence, repeated choice, clear movement, the willingness of both people to meet reality, not just the feeling. Without that, imagination may continue long after the relationship has stopped progressing. This distinction can hurt. Possibility feels romantic. Participation is practical. Possibility can exist in a glance, a message, a memory, a feeling. Participation is shown through conduct over time. A person may give you possibility and still never give you participation. They may awaken hope without having the capacity to honor it. They may make you feel close without being able to build closeness. They may open something in you without being prepared to remain responsible for what they opened. That does not make your hope stupid, it makes your hope human. But human hope still needs truth. If the future was not being built by both of you, then continuing to live inside it will slowly become a form of self-abandonment. You will be giving your emotional life to a house that only you are constructing. You will keep waiting in rooms the other person never entered. You will keep protecting a path that reality has not chosen to walk with you. At some point, you must stop confusing the beauty of a possible life with evidence that the life was actually arriving. That is not bitterness, it is sobriety. The mind may resist this because the imagined future gave the pain a purpose. If everything might still become something, then the suffering feels temporary. It becomes part of a larger story. One day, perhaps, the waiting will be justified. The ache will make sense. The person will return with clarity, and all the uncertainty will be transformed into proof that the bond was real. That kind of story can be very comforting. It can also become very costly. While you are living inside the future that did not arrive, the actual future waits unattended. Your attention remains tied to a person who may not be walking with you. Your imagination keeps serving a life that has no real structure. The present becomes a hallway, not a home, because some part of you is still waiting for the imagined door to open. This is how life becomes suspended. Not completely. You may still function. You may still smile, work, speak, and make plans. But beneath everything, a portion of your inner world remains paused. It is not fully available to new experiences because it is still measuring them against the future that never came. New possibilities feel less powerful because the old one remains emotionally unfinished. The world becomes smaller without you noticing. A closed possibility can become a hidden loyalty. You keep honoring it with attention. You keep returning to it with imagination. You keep protecting it from the evidence that it has not become real. All the while, life continues offering other directions, quieter perhaps, less dramatic perhaps, but real. The task is not to insult the future you imagined. Do not do that. There is no need to mock your own heart for hoping. That imagined future may have carried something sincere. It may have shown you what you long for: steadiness, affection, safety, mutual choice, emotional honesty, a sense of being met. These longings are not the enemy. In fact, they may be important information. The mistake is not that you wanted those things. The mistake would be believing they can only arrive through the person who did not build them with you. Your longing may be valid, even when its chosen object is not. That is a clean and necessary truth. You can honor the desire while releasing the attachment. You can admit that you want love without insisting it must come from that person. You can recognize that you want a shared future without continuing to live inside one that was never truly shared. The need beneath the fantasy can be brought back into your own hands. This is how grief becomes clearer. Instead of simply repeating, "I miss them," you begin to understand the layers. You miss the person, perhaps. You miss the feeling. You miss the hope. You miss the self who believed something beautiful was beginning. You miss the future that gave your days a hidden brightness. Now each layer can be held honestly. The person may be gone. The feeling may need time to fade. The hope may need to be widened beyond one outcome. The self who believed in that future may need compassion, not shame. And the future itself must be returned to reality. This does not mean life becomes immediately lighter. Releasing an imagined future can feel like losing the person again. Sometimes it hurts more because it removes the last private shelter. No more secret future. No more hidden version where everything becomes clear. No more life built around the moment they finally choose differently. Let that hurt. A clean grief is better than a comforting illusion that keeps taking your life. The Stoic discipline here is not cold acceptance. It is the courage to let reality be the ground under your feet, even when imagination feels warmer. A stable life cannot be built on what might have happened. It has to be built on what is happening, what has been shown, what is within reach, and what can still be shaped by your choices. So bring the future back, not all at once, not with force. Start by noticing where it has been living. Notice the scenes you return to. Notice the conversations you imagine. Notice the version of them who finally becomes ready. Notice the life where every painful detail is redeemed. Then ask whether that future is guiding you forward or keeping you loyal to absence. If it is keeping you loyal to absence, it is time to release it. Not because it meant nothing, because your life still means something. The future cannot belong forever to someone who is not present in it. Your imagination is too valuable to be used only as a shrine to what did not arrive. It was meant to create, to dream, to build, to open paths that are still possible. When all of that power remains tied to one person, the rest of life becomes dimmer than it should be. Let the imagined future become what it truly is, a sign of what you wanted, not a command to keep waiting. It can teach you without owning you. It can show you your longing without deciding your direction. It can be mourned without becoming your permanent home. One day, perhaps, you will look back and realize that this was the moment your life began widening again. Not when you stopped caring, not when you erased the memory, but when you understood that the future you imagined with them was not the only future available to you. It was one path, a meaningful one in your mind, a painful one to release, but still only one path, and a path that closes is not the same as a life that ends. The road in front of you may not yet feel beautiful. It may look quiet, uncertain, even empty. But emptiness is not always absence. Sometimes it is space returning, space for your own choices, space for new meaning, space for a future that does not depend on someone else becoming who your imagination needed them to be. That future will not appear while your eyes remain fixed on the one that disappeared. So grieve what you imagined. Name it honestly. Thank it if you can for revealing what your heart wanted. Then release your life from the demand that this one unrealized future must be the measure of all that remains possible. Because they did not only leave a memory behind, they left a future you must now stop living in. And when you finally step out of that future, you return to the only place where life can still meet you. Here. After releasing the future you imagined, another illusion becomes easier to notice. The past may not be returning to you exactly as it was. It may be returning as longing has edited it. This is one of the quiet tricks of attachment. The mind does not always replay the whole relationship. It selects, it brightens, it softens the edges. It brings certain moments close and allows others to fade into the background. What remains is not always a lie, but it may not be the full truth either. A warm conversation becomes larger than the weeks of uncertainty around it. One look begins to carry more meaning than their actual pattern of behavior. A beautiful moment stays sharp, while the anxiety that followed it becomes strangely blurred. The memory does not feel edited because the emotions are real. That is what makes it powerful. You are not inventing the tenderness. You are not pretending that certain moments mattered. They did matter. The danger begins when those moments are allowed to represent the whole story. Longing is rarely a fair historian. It does not sit with all the evidence. It has favorites. It returns to the beginning more easily than the ending. It remembers the warmth before the distance, the promise before the confusion, the closeness before the silence. When the heart is trying to keep someone alive inside, it often protects the parts that make release harder. This can make the past feel almost sacred, not because it was perfect, but because your mind has removed enough of the difficulty to make it look safer than the present. The present is plain. It contains the absence. It contains the unanswered questions. It contains the fact that life is continuing without the person in the place you imagined for them. The edited past offers something else. There, the possibility is still alive. The person is still tender. The connection still has meaning without cost. Everything painful has either been explained, softened, or placed outside the frame. But a frame is not the whole picture. That is the discipline required here. To widen the frame. Do not remember only the moment when they made you feel chosen. Remember how often you waited for clarity. Do not return only to the sentence that gave you hope. Let the unanswered messages, the mixed signals, the emotional tension, and the quiet shrinking of your needs return as well. If your memory keeps showing you the beauty, ask it to show you the pattern too. This is not bitterness. Bitterness distorts in the opposite direction. First, the mind turns someone into a dream, then pain tries to turn them into a villain. Neither extreme is freedom. One keeps you attached through worship. The other keeps you attached through resentment. Clarity needs neither. It can hold beauty and disappointment in the same hand. It can admit that the connection had tenderness without pretending it had stability. It can honor what was meaningful without denying what was missing. This kind of honesty hurts because it takes away the polished version. Yet it also gives you something more valuable than fantasy: contact with reality. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the practice of seeing things plainly without the extra decorations the mind adds. That practice was not meant to make life cold. It was meant to make the soul less easily deceived. And few things deceive the soul more gently than a beautiful memory. A harsh memory is easy to question. A beautiful one feels innocent. It arrives with warmth, with softness, with an ache that almost feels like love in its purest form. The mind rests inside it for a moment and begins to wonder why it ever tried to leave. Then the old pull returns. Maybe it was better than you thought. Maybe the pain was exaggerated. Maybe the difficult parts were not so serious. Maybe the connection deserves another place inside you, another chance, another explanation. This is how the edited past brings the attachment back to life. Not by force, by tenderness. You are pulled not into the whole story, but into the most persuasive part of it. A single scene becomes an argument. The memory of being held, understood, desired or noticed begins to speak louder than everything that made you feel unsafe, uncertain, or alone. That imbalance matters. Because when the past is remembered unfairly, the present begins to seem unfair too. Nothing here feels as powerful as the highlight your mind keeps replaying. Ordinary life appears dull beside a memory that has been polished by longing. New people seem less meaningful because they are being compared to a version of someone that reality no longer has to test. A real person must live with flaws. An edited memory does not. It never arrives late. It never becomes distant. It never avoids responsibility. It never offers confusion after intimacy. It stays exactly where longing wants it, beautiful, unfinished, and protected from the rest of the truth. No wonder the present struggles against it. The present is not polished. It contains unanswered emails, tired mornings, imperfect conversations, and the slow work of rebuilding yourself. It cannot compete with a memory that has been stripped of its cost. So stop asking the present to compete. Instead, make the memory honest. Let it become human again. Bring back the full atmosphere, not only the golden scene. What did your body feel during that time? Was there peace or was there constant alertness? Did you feel free to ask for what you needed, or did you keep adjusting yourself to avoid losing them? Did the connection make you steady, or did it make you dependent on signs? These questions do not erase the good. They rescue you from worshipping a partial truth. Sometimes the body remembers what the mind edits out. A sweet memory may appear, but underneath it there is tension. A longing may arise, yet somewhere in the chest there is the old anxiety of not knowing where you stood. Pay attention to that. The body can carry the part of the story the imagination prefers to skip. Healing often begins when the whole self is allowed to testify. The heart brings the love. The body brings the cost. The mind brings the pattern. Reality brings the ending. Only when all of them are present can memory become truthful. Without that balance, longing becomes a private cinema. It keeps playing the most beautiful scenes and charging you with pain every time you watch. You leave the memory not clearer, but more attached. Not wiser, but more convinced that what is gone was greater than anything still possible. That is how a person becomes trapped inside a past that was never as complete as the mind now presents it. This does not mean the past was fake. Do not make that mistake. There may have been real joy, real tenderness, real connection. Some moments deserve gratitude. Some people remain important even when they cannot remain close. You do not have to destroy the memory in order to be free from it. Freedom is more subtle. It is the ability to remember without exaggerating, to appreciate without returning, to miss without surrendering judgment, to say, there was beauty there, while also admitting there was not enough peace there for me to keep living inside it. That is a mature sentence. It does not insult the past. It simply refuses to be ruled by an incomplete version of it. The mind may resist this at first. It may feel as though remembering the difficult parts is a betrayal of the beautiful ones. But truth does not betray beauty. Truth gives beauty its proper place. A moment can be precious without becoming a command. A person can have mattered without becoming your measure for everything that follows. There is relief in letting the past become ordinary again. Not meaningless, ordinary, human, mixed, real. The connection no longer has to be heaven or disaster. The person no longer has to be perfect or terrible. The memory no longer has to be worshipped or rejected. It can simply be part of your life, something that happened, something that touched you, something that showed you both longing and limitation. When memory becomes real, attachment loses some of its glamour. The spell weakens. You begin to see why you were drawn, but also why you suffered. You can understand what felt special without ignoring what felt unstable. The person becomes less like a lost destiny and more like a human being who entered your story, awakened something, failed in certain ways, perhaps loved in certain ways, and then became part of the past. That is not a small shift. It gives the present a chance. As long as the past remains polished, the present will feel like exile. Once the past becomes honest, the present can begin to feel like ground again. Not exciting at first, perhaps. Not full of immediate meaning, but real. And reality, however quiet, is the only place where healing can actually happen. So when the memory returns, do not push it away immediately. Sit with it carefully. Ask what it is showing and what it is hiding. Let the warmth be there, but invite the full truth to stand beside it. Allow the beauty to remain beautiful, but remove from it the authority to define your future. This is how remembering becomes clean. You stop using the sweetest moments as evidence that you should keep waiting. You stop using the past as a weapon against the present. You stop confusing emotional intensity with accuracy. And slowly, the memory finds its proper size. Not erased, not worshipped, not denied, seen. Once that happens, another truth can finally rise. Perhaps the person you keep missing is no longer the person as they truly were, but an idea your mind has shaped from the most powerful pieces they left behind. Once memory becomes selective, the person inside your mind begins to change. Slowly, almost invisibly, they become less human, not less important, not less meaningful. Less human in the sense that they are no longer held with all their contradictions. The real person had rough edges. They disappointed you in specific ways. They had limits, fears, moods, silences, blind spots, and patterns that affected you. There were moments when their presence warmed you, and other moments when their absence confused you. That was reality. The version that remains inside longing is often different. It is smoother, softer, easier to forgive, more available than they were, more understanding than they proved, more ready than their actions suggested. The mind takes what felt beautiful and builds around it. It fills in the missing spaces with hope. It imagines the apology. It imagines the explanation. It imagines the version of them who finally becomes clear, honest, steady, and capable of meeting you exactly where the real person could not. This is where attachment becomes dangerous. You are no longer only missing someone, you are spending emotional energy on an idea. A real person can be measured by conduct. They either show up or they do not. They speak with clarity or they avoid it. They make room for you or they keep you guessing. They carry the weight of connection or they let you carry most of it alone. An idea does not have to pass through that test. Inside the mind, an idea can stay perfect because it never has to act. It never has to answer the difficult question. It never has to choose in real time. It never has to be consistent on an ordinary day. It never has to face the pressure of actually becoming what you hoped. That is why the imagined version can feel more powerful than the real one. Reality gave you evidence. Imagination gives you possibility. And possibility can become addictive when reality has disappointed you. The real person may have already revealed enough. Their distance may have told you something. Their silence may have shown a limit. Their inconsistency may have made your nervous system tired. Their inability to meet you clearly may have repeated often enough to become a pattern. Still, the idea remains untouched. It stands apart from the evidence. It offers another interpretation. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps timing failed. Perhaps they cared more than they could express. Perhaps beneath the silence there was feeling. Perhaps one day they will understand. Each possibility keeps the imagined version alive, even when the actual person is not participating in your life with the same seriousness. This is not foolishness. It is the mind trying to protect meaning. When someone mattered, the mind does not easily accept that meaning and limitation can belong to the same person. It wants the connection to make sense. It wants beauty to imply destiny. It wants intensity to imply depth. It wants the person who awakened something in you to also be the person capable of caring for what they awakened. But life is more complicated than that. Some people can touch a deep place in you without being able to stay there responsibly. A connection can be real and still not be stable. There can be tenderness without readiness, attraction without commitment, understanding without maturity, and powerful emotion without the structure needed to build a life around it. That truth hurts because it separates feeling from future. You may have felt something real. That does not mean the relationship was able to become real in the way you needed. You may have experienced moments of rare closeness. That does not mean the person had the capacity to turn those moments into consistency. The heart often struggles with this distinction because it wants the depth of a feeling to prove the direction of a life. But a feeling is not a foundation by itself. A foundation requires repeated choice. It requires character. It requires presence when the initial intensity fades. Without that, the mind may keep building a house around someone who only gave you a door. Plato's image of the cave can help here. He described people mistaking shadows for reality because shadows were all they had learned to see. Emotional attachment can create a similar cave inside the mind. A shadow of the person keeps moving across the inner wall, shaped by memory, longing, and imagination. You respond to it as if it were the whole truth. You feel pain because of it. You wait because of it. You compare the present to it. Yet the shadow is not the person. It is made from real pieces, but it is not reality in full. That is why asking, "Do I miss them?" is not always enough. A better question is more precise. Which version of them am I missing? The person who actually stood in front of you? Or the person your mind keeps improving after they left? The relationship as it truly was? Or the relationship your imagination keeps repairing in private? Those questions may disturb you, but they can also free you. They interrupt the spell. They bring the attachment back into contact with evidence. They ask your longing to stand beside reality instead of replacing it. This does not mean you have to become harsh. There is no need to insult the person in order to release the idea. Turning them into a villain only creates another kind of attachment. Resentment can bind you almost as tightly as longing. The goal is not to hate them. The goal is to stop giving an imagined version of them more authority than the real pattern deserves. Clarity has a calmer tone. It can admit that they gave you beautiful moments. It can also admit that those moments were not enough. It can remember the connection without exaggerating its capacity. This is where many people get trapped. They take a few powerful moments and treat them as proof of a whole relationship. One deep conversation becomes proof that the person understood them completely. One period of closeness becomes proof that the bond was meant to last. One rare tenderness becomes evidence against months of uncertainty. The mind gives the exception more weight than the pattern, but your life is shaped by patterns, not exceptions. An exception can be beautiful. A pattern tells you what you are actually living with. If someone is kind once but unclear often, your nervous system lives with the uncertainty, not the rare kindness. If someone offers warmth occasionally but leaves you anxious most of the time, the attachment may feed on the warmth while your body carries the cost. Pay attention to the cost. The idea of someone usually hides it. The real situation reveals it. How did your life feel while you were attached to them? Did you feel steady, or were you always interpreting? Did your self-respect grow, or did you keep bargaining with your own needs? Was there room for honesty, or did you become careful because clarity felt dangerous? Did the connection bring you closer to yourself, or did it pull your attention away from everything that made you whole? These questions bring the person back into reality, not the fantasy, the lived experience. A fantasy focuses on what might have been. Lived experience includes what actually happened inside you while you were hoping, the waiting, the tension, the moments when you checked your phone too often, the way one small sign could lift your mood while one silence could ruin the day. That information matters because love should not require you to live in constant emotional weather. If an idea of someone keeps you warm while the reality of them kept you unstable, you have to notice the difference. That difference is where your freedom begins. At first, seeing it may feel like betrayal, the attachment may resist. It may try to protect the imagined version, because losing that version can feel like losing the person all over again. In some ways, it is even harder. The real person may have hurt you. The imagined one has been comforting you. Letting go of the imagined one means giving up the private place where the story still becomes beautiful. That grief is real. Let it come. You are not only releasing a person, you are releasing the version your mind created to make the loss easier to bear. The imagined apology, the hidden love, the future repair, the day everything becomes clear. These inner scenes may have helped you survive the first shock of absence, but what helps you survive at one stage can become a prison in another. Healing requires updating the truth. What was once a comfort may now be a chain. The person in your mind may have served a purpose. They gave shape to longing. They kept hope alive when finality felt too sharp. They allowed you to remain close to something that was no longer close in reality. But if that inner version now keeps you from living, it no longer deserves protection. Your future needs that space. Your attention needs that space. Your heart needs contact with what is real, not only what is possible in imagination. A real life cannot be built around a person who exists mostly as an idea. Real life requires presence, action, mutuality, and truth. It requires people as they are, not as your wound needs them to become. When you choose reality, you do not become less loving. You become less available to illusion. There is strength in that. Quiet strength, the kind that can whisper to the heart, yes, there was beauty. But beauty alone is not enough reason to keep waiting. The kind that can look at a memory and honor it without kneeling before it. The kind that can accept that someone mattered deeply and still was not the path forward. This is not the death of love. It is the return of judgment. Without judgment, love becomes vulnerable to fantasy. It starts calling uncertainty romantic. It calls inconsistency complicated. It calls distance mysterious. It calls pain proof of depth. Before long, the heart is not loving a person anymore. It is defending a story. You deserve more than a story. You deserve truth with tenderness. You deserve connection that exists outside imagination. You deserve a future that does not depend on someone becoming clearer in your mind than they ever became in your life. So begin separating the person from the idea. The person is what happened. The idea is what your mind keeps adding. The person is the pattern. The idea is the possibility. The person belongs to reality. The idea survives through attention. Do this gently, because the mind may not let go all at once. It may return to the improved version again. It may show you the tender scene, the hopeful interpretation, the imagined return. When that happens, do not attack yourself. Simply bring the full truth back into the room. Remember the warmth and remember the uncertainty. Remember the beauty and remember the cost. Remember what you wished they were and remember what they actually showed you. This balance is not cruelty. It is mercy toward yourself. Because once you stop confusing the idea with the person, the attachment loses its most powerful disguise. You can finally see that what you are longing for may still be valid, but it may not belong to them anymore. You may still want love, safety, depth, steadiness, and being chosen. Those longings deserve respect, but the person who awakened the longing is not always the person meant to fulfill it. That realization can hurt, but it also gives your future back. It allows you to take the meaning out of the fantasy and return it to your own life. Instead of waiting for them to become the answer, you begin asking what the longing is teaching you. Instead of staying loyal to an imagined version, you become loyal to the truth. And truth, even when it is painful, is kinder than illusion in the end. Because illusion keeps you attached to someone who cannot meet you. Truth returns you to the life that still can. Hope is one of the most dangerous things to misunderstand. At its best, hope keeps the heart from closing too early. It gives a person enough strength to move through uncertainty without becoming bitter. During painful seasons, hope can be a form of oxygen. It reminds you that the future is not limited to the wound you are standing in now. But hope can also become a beautiful prison. The difference is not always obvious at first. A healthy hope gives you movement. It opens the world. It allows you to keep living, growing, and paying attention to what is still possible. It does not require reality to obey one specific outcome before you can breathe again. Unhealthy hope does the opposite. It narrows everything. It ties your peace to one person's return, one apology, one message, one explanation, one change of heart. Life becomes smaller without seeming smaller, because all possibilities are quietly judged by whether they bring that person back into the story. That kind of hope does not feel like a prison in the beginning. It feels tender. It feels loyal. It feels like proof that the connection mattered. You may think you are simply keeping a place open. You may believe that refusing to fully move on shows depth, patience, or faith in what you shared. The mind finds small pieces of evidence to support this. A memory that felt real, a look you cannot forget, a sentence that sounded unfinished, a period of closeness that seemed too meaningful to vanish without return. From those fragments, waiting begins to justify itself. And once waiting has a reason, it can last much longer than it should. This is why you have to examine hope with honesty, not cruelty. Do not attack the part of you that still wishes things could be different. That part is not foolish. It is wounded, and sometimes wounds continue reaching for the last place they felt warm. But tenderness toward yourself must not become permission to remain suspended. There is a difference between keeping the heart open and keeping your life on hold. An open heart can still walk forward. It can still receive new meaning. It can still care for the present. It can admit that life may surprise you without making surprise the only plan. A life on hold keeps listening for one sound. It checks the same door. It studies the same silence. It treats ordinary days as something to endure until the imagined return gives them value again. That is not openness. That is emotional waiting. And waiting can become an identity if you practice it long enough. You begin to shape your days around absence. Even when you're not consciously thinking about them, something in the background remains alert. The mind watches for signs. The body reacts to small reminders. A notification can change your mood before you even know why. Their possible return becomes an invisible weather system moving through everything. This is how one person, even from a distance, can continue regulating your inner life, not through action, through expectation. Epictetus taught that peace depends on learning the boundary between what belongs to us and what does not. You can choose your conduct, your attention, your honesty, your response to pain. Another person's decision does not belong to you. Their timing does not belong to you. Their remorse, clarity, courage, and willingness to return do not belong to you. The moment your hope depends entirely on what does not belong to you, your peace becomes unstable. It has to. You have tied it to something outside your command. This is not a call to become hopeless. Hopelessness hardens the heart and pretends that disappointment is wisdom. That is not the answer. The answer is to widen hope until it is no longer chained to one outcome. Hope for healing, hope for peace, hope for a future that does not require self-abandonment, hope for love that is mutual, steady, and real. Hope for the strength to accept what does not return and the courage to receive what still can. That kind of hope gives life back to you. It does not make you kneel before one possibility. The painful form of hope often hides behind the question, what if? What if they come back? What if they finally understand? What if this is only a long pause? What if moving forward means closing a door that was meant to open later? Those questions can keep the mind trapped because none of them can be fully disproven. There is always some small possibility, Life is unpredictable. People change. Stories can turn. The problem is not that return is impossible. The problem is that you may be sacrificing your present to an uncertainty that has made no promise. Possibility alone is not enough to deserve your whole life. A locked door might open one day. That does not mean you should sleep outside it. If something real returns, let it return to a person who is alive, grounded, and whole enough to meet it clearly. Do not freeze yourself in longing so that someone can find you exactly where they left you. That is not love. That is the disappearance of your own life in the name of being available. You can remain open without remaining stuck. This distinction is one of the marks of emotional maturity. Immaturity turns hope into waiting. Maturity turns hope into trust. Not trust that a specific person will return, but trust that life can continue even if they do not. Trust that your heart can heal without becoming hard. Trust that what was meaningful does not have to be repeated to remain meaningful. At some point, you have to ask what the hope is costing you. Has it made you more alive or less present? Has it opened your future or reduced it to one imagined scene? Has it helped you grow or kept you emotionally loyal to someone who is no longer choosing the same reality? The answer may not come all at once. A part of you may resist because releasing painful hope can feel like accepting a second loss. First, you lost the person. Now you are losing the private future where everything still becomes clear. That grief is real. Let it be real. There is no need to rush it, but do not confuse the pain of releasing hope with proof that the hope was healthy. Some chains hurt when they are removed because the skin has grown around them. Freedom can ache at first. You may feel empty when you stop waiting. The inner life had been organized around a possibility, and when that possibility is no longer allowed to occupy the center, a quiet space appears. For a while, that space may feel like loneliness. It may seem as if something meaningful has been taken away. Stay with it. The space is not only emptiness, it is room returning. Room for your attention. Room for your body to rest. Room for friendships that do not keep you guessing. Room for work, discipline, prayer, health, creativity, and the ordinary life that was quietly neglected while the mind lived beside a possibility. Unhealthy hope keeps the room crowded with what might happen. Healing begins when there is finally space for what is happening. This is not dramatic work. Much of it is private and unglamorous. You stop checking one thing. You stop interpreting one silence. You stop building one imagined conversation. You let one day belong to you without measuring it against whether they thought of you. Small withdrawals of attention become large returns of self-respect. Over time, the hope changes shape. It no longer clings to their return as the only acceptable future. It becomes wider, cleaner, less desperate. You can wish them well without waiting for them to complete your story. You can remember what mattered without keeping your life paused. You can accept that the connection touched you while refusing to let it govern everything that follows. That is the kind of hope worth keeping. Not the hope that makes you smaller, the hope that helps you live. So be honest with the hope you are carrying. Hold it up to the light. See whether it has wings or bars. Notice whether it returns you to life or keeps you facing the same closed door. If it gives you courage, let it breathe. If it keeps you suspended, begin releasing it with compassion. You do not have to hate the person to stop waiting. You do not have to deny the beauty to leave the hallway. You do not have to become hopeless to become free. The moment you stop making one uncertain outcome the condition of your peace, your life begins to widen again. And once life widens, you can see the next truth more clearly. The attachment has not survived only because they mattered. It has survived because your attention keeps feeding it. What receives your attention receives life. This is true even when you do not intend it. A person may no longer be close to you. The connection may have ended, faded, or become too unclear to call real. Yet the attachment can remain active because the mind keeps returning with food. A memory here, a profile check there, a reread message at night, a small investigation into what they are doing, who they are with, whether they seem happy, whether they might still think of you. None of these acts feels large on its own. That is how the pattern survives. It does not always ask for something dramatic. It asks for 5 seconds, one look, one scroll, one old photo, one imagined conversation before sleep, one private attempt to decode a silence that has already taken too much from you. The mind treats each act as small, but repetition has its own force. A path becomes easier to walk each time you walk it. The thought appears more quickly, the emotional response becomes more familiar. Soon the attachment feels automatic, as if it arrives with no help from you at all. The first thought may not be chosen. The feeding often is. This distinction is essential. You cannot control every memory that appears. A song may bring them back. A place may open an old atmosphere. The body may react before the mind understands what happened. Grief has echoes, and echoes do not ask permission. But after the echo comes a moment of participation. You can follow the memory into a full story, or you can let it pass with dignity. You can turn longing into an hour of searching, or you can name the feeling and return to the day. You can feed the attachment with images, interpretations, fantasies, and comparisons, or you can refuse to keep strengthening what you are trying to outgrow. That refusal is not coldness, it is discipline. Coldness denies the feeling. Discipline allows the feeling without serving it. The difference may seem small, but it changes the whole process. If you deny what you feel, the mind may fight back harder. If you shame yourself for missing them, the wound may hide instead of heal. Discipline does something cleaner. It admits the ache, then refuses to make the ache the ruler of your attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." That line should be taken seriously. The mind is not a neutral room. Whatever you repeatedly place inside it begins to color the walls. If absence receives the morning, the afternoon, and the night, absence becomes the atmosphere. If regret receives your quiet hours, regret begins shaping your view of life. When fantasy is given constant attention, reality starts to feel less meaningful by comparison. This is how attachment can continue long after contact has ended. Not because the other person is powerful beyond measure, because your attention keeps rebuilding the bridge. Each check, each replay, each small return tells the mind that this person remains central. The nervous system learns the route. Loneliness takes that route. Boredom takes that route. Anxiety takes that route. Even ordinary silence begins looking for them because the mind has been trained to use them as an emotional destination. Training can be changed, but not by wishing. A sincere desire to move on is not enough if your habits keep carrying you backward. Many people become frustrated because they feel stuck for months, sometimes years, while still doing small things every day that preserve the attachment. They want freedom, but their attention remains loyal to the cage. This is not hypocrisy, it is conflict. Part of you wants to heal. Another part wants the familiar ache because the ache still feels connected to them. The pain is unpleasant, yet it keeps the story warm. A clean present can feel too empty at first, while longing provides emotional intensity. Even suffering can become familiar enough to feel like home. That is why withdrawing attention may feel uncomfortable. You remove the ritual, and suddenly the evening feels strange. You stop checking, and the mind becomes restless. You refuse to reread the old conversation, and the body feels as if something is unfinished. These reactions do not mean you are making the wrong choice. They may simply mean the pattern is losing access. The mind asks for what it has practiced. Give it a new practice, not all at once. Do not turn healing into another impossible standard. Begin with one doorway, one place where you normally feed the attachment, one ritual that keeps reopening the wound. Remove it, delay it, or interrupt it. Let the thought come without obeying the old sequence. A memory appears during the day. Instead of expanding it, you breathe and return to the task. The urge to check rises at night. You feel the pull, but you keep your hand away from the phone. An imagined conversation begins forming. Rather than finishing the scene, you remind yourself that your piece does not require rehearsing words that will not be spoken. This is how attention is reclaimed, quietly, repeatedly, without drama. At first, the old pattern may return many times. That is normal. The goal is not to become untouched overnight. The goal is to stop feeding every return. A thought can visit without receiving a meal. A feeling can pass through without being given a permanent room. A memory can knock without being invited to stay until morning. There is mercy in that boundary, not only toward yourself, but toward the memory itself. When you keep replaying something beautiful until it becomes painful, you damage your relationship with it. The memory starts losing its tenderness and becoming a weapon. It no longer reminds you that something mattered. It convinces you that nothing else can matter. Let meaningful things rest. A chapter does not become less real because you stop rereading it every night. A person does not become meaningless because your attention returns to your own life. Love, memory, and gratitude do not require constant rehearsal. This is where many people confuse healing with betrayal. They fear that if they stop thinking about someone so intensely, the connection will be erased. But intensity is not the same as honor. Obsession does not prove love. Constant mental return does not protect the past. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is let what happened take its place without demanding that it remain alive through daily pain. The present needs nourishment too. Your body needs it. Your work needs it. Your friendships need it. Your health, discipline, curiosity, and future all need attention. When one absent person receives most of the inner life, everything else becomes underfed. The world narrows. You may still function, but your deeper vitality has been redirected toward what cannot respond. Attention is a form of love. Be careful what you love through repetition. If you continue giving your best inner hours to absence, absence will grow. If you keep giving imagination the most intimate part of the night, imagination will keep becoming more persuasive than reality. The emotional life will not become free while its daily meals remain unchanged, so begin feeding what you want to live. Feed steadiness, feed health, feed honest friendship, feed discipline. Feed the parts of yourself that became quiet while the attachment took over. This does not have to look impressive. A walk can be a return. A clean room can be a return. Work done with attention can be a return. A conversation with someone present can be a return. Rest without checking can be a return. Small acts matter because attention is cumulative. A life is not rebuilt only through major decisions. It is rebuilt through where the mind is brought back again and again after it wanders. Every return to the present weakens the old root a little. Every refusal to feed the fantasy gives reality more room. Every ordinary act of self-respect becomes evidence that your life is no longer organized around what left. One day the change becomes visible. The memory still appears, but it does not take the whole room. The name crosses your mind without pulling your body into the old ache. You can feel sadness without immediately searching for signs. There is more space between the thought and the reaction. That space is freedom beginning to form. It may not look dramatic. Do not underestimate it. A little space inside the mind can change an entire life. Within that space, you can choose where attention goes next. You can let the past remain past. You can stop treating longing as an instruction. You can finally give the present enough nourishment to become meaningful again. This is not forgetting. It is no longer feeding. And what is no longer fed eventually loses its authority. The attachment may protest. It may return with beautiful memories, urgent questions, or the old ache that makes you want to visit the past one more time. Meet it gently, but do not serve it automatically. The part of you that wants to heal must become more consistent than the part of you that wants to revisit. That is the work, not one heroic moment. 100 quiet refusals, 100 ordinary returns, 100 times choosing the life that is here over the story that keeps asking to be revived. And once your attention begins returning to you, another illusion becomes clearer. Much of what felt like deep reflection was actually rumination wearing the mask of understanding. Rumination can feel like wisdom when the wound is still open. That is what makes it difficult to stop. You sit with the memory and believe you are trying to understand. You revisit what happened because you want clarity. The mind returns to the same conversation, the same silence, the same moment where everything seemed to shift. It studies tone, timing, pauses, missed signs, possible meanings. From the inside, this can feel responsible, even mature. After all, a person should reflect. A painful experience should not simply be thrown behind you without examination. If you refuse to learn from what hurt you, the same pattern may return under a different name. There is dignity in asking what happened. There is maturity in looking at your own choices, your blind spots, your needs, your fears, and the way you participated in the story. But reflection and rumination are not the same thing. Reflection gives you something you can use. Rumination keeps taking you back to the same place with nothing new in your hands. The difference becomes clearer when you look at what happens afterward. Real reflection may hurt, but it leaves behind a certain cleanliness. A lesson appears. A boundary becomes visible. A pattern is named. Even if sadness remains, there is a little more order inside you. Rumination creates the opposite effect. After an hour of thinking, the mind feels heavier. The body is more tense. The desire to check, imagine, explain, or reach for the past becomes stronger. Nothing has been resolved, but the attachment has been refreshed. The wound has not been understood. It has been reopened. This is why endless thinking can be so deceptive. It produces motion without direction. A person can spend months inside mental activity and still never move one step closer to peace. Every night brings another review of the same evidence. Every quiet hour becomes another courtroom. The past is brought forward again, examined again, questioned again. Yet no final answer arrives because the mind is often asking questions that reality may never answer. What did they really feel? Did they care more than they showed? Could the ending have changed if one moment had gone differently? Are they thinking about you now? Was the connection rare, or did your longing make it rare after the loss? Some of these questions may be understandable. A few may even be useful once. The problem begins when the question stops being a doorway and becomes a room. You enter it again and again, not because it is leading somewhere, but because it has become familiar. Familiar pain can begin to feel like depth. That is dangerous. Depth reveals something. Rumination only repeats the ache with more language around it. It gives suffering a serious tone, so you do not notice that you are still standing in the same emotional place. The mind becomes skilled at making the loop sound important. Maybe if you think one more time, the hidden meaning will appear. Maybe if you replay the scene with enough precision, the wound will finally become fair. Maybe if you understand them completely, you will stop hurting. But sometimes the lesson is already visible and the mind refuses it because the lesson is too simple. They were not consistent. The connection was meaningful but unstable. You wanted more than they were able or willing to give. You ignored your own discomfort because hope felt better than honesty. You cannot receive closure from a person who is not offering clarity. Simple truths can feel harsh because they close doors. A complicated story leaves room to keep searching. That is why the mind may prefer complexity even when complexity keeps you trapped. It is easier to analyze for another month than to accept one clean sentence that changes what you must do next. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the discipline of bringing the mind back to what is present and useful. Not every thought deserves to be followed simply because it arrives. The mind is capable of producing endless inner speech, but Stoic discipline asks whether that speech is serving judgment, character, and action. A thought that leads to right action deserves attention. A thought that only refreshes helplessness deserves a boundary. That boundary may feel strange at first. You may be used to letting the mind roam freely through the past, as if every memory has the right to take you wherever it wants. Yet a mind without boundaries can become a place where pain governs by repetition. You need to learn how to interrupt the loop without attacking yourself, not with anger, with authority. When the old scene begins, pause and ask what is being offered. Is there a new lesson here? Is there a decision to make? Is there responsibility to take, a boundary to set, a truth to admit? If the answer is yes, take the lesson cleanly. Write it down if necessary. Let it become part of your future conduct. If nothing new appears, then recognize the loop for what it is. The mind is not healing, it is rehearsing. That recognition matters because it removes the false dignity from the pattern. You are not being profound by suffering through the same memory for the 100th time. You are not honoring the connection by losing another evening to a thought that has already given you everything it can give. You are not proving the past mattered by allowing it to occupy the present without limit. There is a point where continued analysis becomes a refusal to live. This does not mean you should force yourself to move on quickly. Healing has its own pace. Grief needs space. Some truths can only be absorbed slowly. The problem is not that you still think about them. The problem is when thinking becomes your only relationship with the wound. At some point, insight must become movement. A lesson about boundaries should become a boundary. A lesson about self-abandonment should become a return to yourself. A lesson about inconsistency should become a clearer standard. A lesson about longing should become a wiser use of attention. Without that movement, reflection decays into rumination. And rumination keeps the wound emotionally current. It makes something old feel immediate. The body does not always know that the event is no longer happening. When the mind replays it vividly, the nervous system responds as if the danger, rejection, or uncertainty is present again. The heart starts beating for a past that cannot be changed. That is too high a price for thoughts that are not teaching you anymore. You must become protective of your inner space. Not every memory is entitled to the whole evening. Not every question deserves another hour. Not every ache must be investigated as if it contains a final revelation. Some thoughts are only old roads asking to be walked again because you have walked them so often. A road can be familiar and still lead nowhere. When you notice that, return. Return to the body, return to the room, return to the task in front of you. Return to the life that does not need the past to explain itself before it can continue. The return may feel small, but each return weakens the authority of the loop. There is power in ordinary interruption. You wash your face instead of rereading the message. You step outside instead of rebuilding the conversation. You finish the work instead of searching for signs. You let the unanswered question remain unanswered for one more night. None of this looks dramatic. It is not the kind of healing people romanticize, but this is where freedom is built, in the quiet moment where the mind reaches backward and you do not follow it all the way down. Over time, something shifts. The past still appears, but it no longer owns the entire inner room. The question still rises, but it does not automatically become a spiral. The memory still carries feeling, but feeling no longer becomes permission to reopen the wound. This is the difference between having a memory and being governed by one. You are allowed to think about what happened. You are not required to live there. That distinction can save you, because the purpose of reflection is not to become an expert in your own pain. It is to gather enough truth from the pain that you can stop making the wound the center of your education. Once the lesson has been taken, the mind needs a new loyalty, not to the loop, to life. And as you begin to step out of the loop, you may notice something deeper beneath all the thinking. Part of the suffering was never only about losing them. It was about how far you drifted from yourself while trying to keep them. When the mental loop begins to loosen, a quieter pain becomes easier to feel. You may discover that you were not only missing them, you were missing yourself. This realization often comes late because attachment keeps attention turned outward. Their silence becomes the subject. Their choices become the mystery. Their possible return becomes the hidden question behind the day. The mind studies the other person so closely that it barely notices what has been happening at home, inside your own life. Then a strange tiredness appears. Not the sharp pain of heartbreak. Something lower, heavier, more intimate. The tiredness of having lived too long away from your own center. Maybe your routines weakened while you waited. Work became harder to enter fully. Sleep changed. Meals lost their rhythm. A room became messier than usual because the inner life was already crowded. Friends spoke, but some part of you remained absent. The body continued carrying you, while the mind spent its best energy interpreting another person's distance. This is how self-abandonment often begins. Not with one dramatic betrayal of yourself, with small departures. You feel discomfort and explain it away. A need rises, but you silence it because asking might disturb the connection. Inconsistency hurts, yet you keep calling it confusion, timing, fear, or complexity. Your standards bend slightly, then bend again. Eventually, the shape of your life starts adjusting around someone who has not given you the same steadiness in return. From the inside, this can look like patience. It can feel like devotion. Sometimes it even feels noble. But there is a form of loyalty that becomes dangerous when it is offered to another person at the cost of your own clarity. You remain emotionally available while they remain uncertain. You give understanding where honesty was needed. You keep making room for their limits while your own needs are placed in storage. At some point, the connection does not only hurt because of what they did. It hurts because of what you kept doing to yourself in order to preserve it. That sentence is difficult, but it should not be used as a weapon against you. The goal is not self-blame. Blame keeps the wound trapped in shame. The goal is recognition. Recognition gives you a way back. You were not weak for wanting love. You were not foolish for becoming attached. A human being is built for connection. Warmth matters. Being chosen matters. Feeling understood after a long season of loneliness can open places in the heart that have been closed for years. It is natural to move towards something that feels like shelter. The problem begins when shelter becomes dependency. Their attention becomes relief. Their silence becomes punishment. A message lifts the day. Distance ruins it. Warmth from them makes you feel valuable, while uncertainty makes you question your entire worth. Without noticing it, your inner balance becomes tied to a person whose choices remain outside your control. The Stoics would look at this with great seriousness, not because they despised love, but because they understood the danger of building peace on unstable ground. Anything outside your control can change. People can become distant, feelings can shift, circumstances can interfere. Another person's capacity may be smaller than your longing. If your stability depends completely on their steadiness, your life will tremble whenever they do. That trembling may be what you called love. But love and emotional dependence are not identical. Love can deepen your life without becoming the foundation of your identity. Dependence makes another person's presence feel necessary for you to remain whole. Love allows care while preserving dignity. Dependence slowly turns dignity into something negotiable. The distinction matters because without it, you may romanticize your own disappearance. You may say you are loyal when you are actually afraid to let go. You may call it depth when it is really anxiety. You may describe the connection as rare because the emotional highs were intense, while ignoring how often the lows made you abandon your own peace. This is why returning to yourself requires honesty about the cost. What did you stop doing while your attention revolved around them? Which parts of your life became smaller? Where did your standards become flexible in ways you would never advise for someone you love? How often did you ask what they felt while avoiding the more important question of how the connection was affecting you? These questions are not comfortable. They bring the light back to places attachment prefers to keep dim. Yet this is where the deeper healing begins, because the issue is no longer only whether they come back. A more important question appears: can you come back to yourself? The ancient command, know thyself, which Socrates treated as central to wisdom, becomes practical here. Knowing yourself is not an abstract philosophical exercise. It includes knowing where you become weak, where you hand away authority, where longing changes your standards, where fear of abandonment makes you accept less than you need. Self-knowledge can hurt. It also restores power. If you see the pattern is no longer completely hidden. If you understand how the attachment pulled you away from yourself, you can begin reversing the movement. Not through grand declarations, through small acts of return. A promise kept to yourself, a boundary honored, a morning routine rebuilt, a message not sent from panic, a need admitted without apology. A quiet evening spent in your own life instead of studying someone else's. These are not small things when your inner world has been organized around another person. They are evidence. Each act tells the nervous system that you are becoming reliable to yourself again. Self-trust returns through evidence, not through slogans. It returns when you stop abandoning your own needs to preserve a fragile connection. It grows when your actions prove that you will not keep placing your worth in someone else's uncertainty. Little by little, the self you neglected begins to feel safer in your own hands. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. If you have spent a long time measuring the day through their attention, a day that belongs only to you may feel empty. The quiet can seem strange. Without waiting, you may not know what to focus on. Without interpreting their behavior, the mind may search for another source of intensity. Stay with the quiet. Do not rush back to the old wound just because the return to yourself feels less dramatic. Drama is not the same as meaning. Sometimes a peaceful life feels dull at first because the nervous system has grown accustomed to emotional weather. The highs, the lows, the uncertainty, the relief after distance, the ache after silence, all of it creates a rhythm. Once that rhythm fades, calm can feel almost unfamiliar. But calm is where you can rebuild, not the glamorous self, not the version trying to prove that the loss did not matter. The real self, the one with a body that needs care, work that needs attention, standards that need protection, and a future that cannot be built while you are living as an echo of someone else's choices. Returning to yourself does not require hatred toward them. It does not require deleting every memory, nor does it require denying that something meaningful happened. It requires one honest reordering. They may have mattered, but they cannot remain more central to your life than your own soul. That is the quiet line. Once crossed, healing becomes less about their absence and more about your presence. You begin to ask better questions. Not whether they miss you, but whether you have been missing yourself. Not whether they will choose you, but whether you are choosing your own dignity. Not whether the story can restart, but whether you are willing to restart the relationship with your own life. This changes the emotional direction. The energy once used to track them begins returning to your own ground. You notice the goals that lost momentum, the friendships that still have warmth, the habits that make your body feel steady, the work that gives structure, the silence that no longer needs to be filled with their image. A life begins to gather around you again, not instantly, but enough. Enough to feel that the person you were before the attachment has not vanished. Enough to see that your identity was not destroyed. It was covered. Enough to understand that the deeper loss can become a deeper return if you choose to use it that way. This is where pain begins to transform. Not because the person becomes irrelevant, because you become present. The absence may still ache, but it no longer defines the whole room. The memory may still move through you, but it does not erase your own needs. Longing may still appear, but it no longer receives permission to take you away from yourself for days at a time. That is progress, quiet, real progress, and it leads to a stronger truth. The healing cannot depend on being chosen again by the person who left. It has to begin with refusing to build your worth on being chosen at all. When you begin returning to yourself, the next question is not whether they will choose you again. The deeper question is whether you will stop making your worth depend on being chosen. That dependence is difficult to notice because being chosen feels good. There is warmth in being wanted. A message can soften the whole day. A voice that looks for you, a person who notices your absence, a hand extended toward you after distance. All of this can make the heart feel less alone in the world. There is nothing wrong with receiving that. Connection is not weakness. Wanting to be loved does not make you fragile. The human heart is not meant to become a closed room where nothing enters and nothing matters. Affection can nourish you. Attention can comfort you. Being seen by someone you care about can feel like light entering a place that had grown used to darkness. The danger begins when light from another person becomes the only proof that you exist. If your confidence rises only when they move toward you, it will fall the moment they step back. If their attention becomes the mirror where you look for your value, silence will feel like disfigurement. If being chosen becomes the foundation beneath your inner life, then every delay, every distance, every change in tone will shake the whole structure. That is too unstable a place to live. No human being should become the owner of your worth. Not because people are evil, because people are changeable. They have fears, moods, wounds, limits, selfish moments, and inner conflicts you cannot always see. Someone may care and still fail to act with steadiness. Another may admire you without knowing how to love responsibly. A person can be sincere in one season and unclear in the next. If your value depends on their consistency, your peace will tremble with every movement inside them. This is why attachment can become so exhausting. The issue is no longer only whether the relationship continues. The deeper issue is that your sense of self has become tied to another person's behavior. Their warmth makes you feel chosen. Their distance makes you feel diminished. A reply restores you. Silence removes you from yourself. One small sign brings relief, while one unanswered moment pulls the mind into self-questioning. That is not love in its free form. It is love mixed with dependency. A healthy connection can add beauty to your life. It can make the world feel wider, softer, more intimate. But it should not become the place where your entire identity waits for permission. When another person's attention becomes your emotional proof of worth, you are no longer simply loving them. You are asking them to carry a burden no person can carry well. They become lover, mirror, judge, medicine, and verdict. That is too much for them and for you. The Stoics placed worth somewhere more durable, not in reputation, not in admiration, not in whether someone desired, praised, chose, or stayed. They returned again and again to character, the way a person lives, the choices made under pressure, the ability to act with dignity when circumstances do not obey desire. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." That source cannot be someone's message. It cannot be another person's mood. It cannot be the temporary happiness of being wanted. The source has to be deeper than that, or life will keep taking it from you every time someone changes. This does not mean you should stop caring whether people choose you. Indifference is not maturity. It is natural to feel pain when affection is withdrawn. It is natural to feel sadness when someone you wanted does not meet you with the same steadiness. The Stoic path is not pretending the wound is unreal. The point is more precise. Their choice may affect your emotions. It must not become the definition of your value. There is a difference between feeling hurt and feeling erased. Hurt means something touched you. Erasure means you have handed another person the authority to decide what you are. That authority belongs to no one else. This is where self-worth has to become practical. It cannot remain a sentence you repeat while your behavior contradicts it. Many people declare, "I know my worth," while still waiting for one person to confirm it. They speak the language of self-respect, then return to the same place where they are ignored, half-chosen, kept uncertain, or emotionally starved. Words alone do not rebuild worth. Evidence does. You rebuild it every time you act like your life matters, even when they are silent. You strengthen it when you keep a promise to yourself, instead of breaking your day apart over someone's inconsistency. A boundary honored in private can restore more dignity than 100 affirmations spoken in pain. The heart learns from what you repeatedly do. If you keep abandoning your standards for attention, the heart learns that attention is more valuable than peace. If you keep tolerating confusion to avoid loss, the heart learns that love requires self-betrayal. When you return to your own life, even while missing someone, a different lesson begins. I can care deeply and still not disappear. That lesson changes you. Slowly, worth moves back inside, not in a loud way. You may not wake up suddenly feeling untouchable. More likely, the change appears through small acts of steadiness. You no longer check something that humiliates you. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding. A day arrives when their silence still hurts, but it no longer destroys your ability to care for yourself. That is progress. Quiet progress counts. You do not need to become proud in order to become free. Pride often hides the same wound in stronger clothing. It declares, "I never needed them," because admitting need feels too vulnerable. Self-worth has a calmer voice. It can admit, "I wanted them, I miss them, this hurt me, and still, my value does not depend on their ability to choose me." That kind of honesty has weight. It does not pretend. It does not beg. It stands. When your worth is built on character, another person's absence can still sadden you, but it cannot empty you. If you keep your dignity, act with honesty, honor your own needs, and refuse to make pain an excuse for self-abandonment, then something solid begins to form beneath the grief. You become someone you can trust. That trust is more important than being chosen by someone who could not meet you fully. A person may choose you and still not be good for your peace. They may return and still not be ready. Their attention may feel wonderful and still leave you unstable if it lacks consistency, clarity, or care. Being chosen is not automatically salvation. Sometimes the greater salvation is learning not to need a particular person's choice in order to remain whole. This is where love becomes cleaner. You can want to be loved without turning love into a courtroom. You can receive affection without becoming addicted to it. You can grieve someone's absence without making that absence the final measure of your soul. A mature heart does not reject connection. It refuses to worship it. The person who left may have mattered. The bond may have awakened something real. Their attention may have given you a glimpse of warmth you had been missing for a long time. All of that can be acknowledged without making them the source of your value. The source has to come home, back to your conduct, back to your standards, back to the life you build when no one is watching, back to the quiet promises you keep when no one arrives to reward you for keeping them. This is where strength becomes less dramatic and more reliable. It is not the strength of pretending you do not care. It is the strength of caring without surrendering the throne inside you. Another person may sit beside your heart for a season. They may influence it, move it, soften it, even wound it. But they do not get to rule it. That place belongs to your own character. And once you begin building your worth there, the absence of another person changes shape. It may still hurt. It may still bring longing. Certain nights may still feel heavy. Yet beneath all of that, a new conviction begins to hold. I can be unchosen here and still not be unworthy. That conviction will not remove grief immediately. It will remove shame from the grief. And without shame, healing becomes cleaner. Because the goal is not to prove that you never needed love. The goal is to stop confusing one person's inability to choose you with evidence that you are not worth choosing at all. Their absence can feel like a verdict. That is what makes it so painful. A person leaves, grows silent, becomes distant, chooses another direction, or stops showing up with the warmth they once gave. The event itself is already hard enough. Yet the mind often adds another wound beneath it. It turns the absence into an accusation. Maybe you were not enough. Maybe you were too much. Maybe if you had been calmer, more interesting, more beautiful, more patient, more mysterious, more successful, more lovable, things would have been different. This kind of thinking feels convincing because it touches old fears. It rarely appears as one clear sentence. More often it moves through the body as heaviness, shame, comparison, and the quiet belief that someone's departure has revealed something final about you. But absence is not always revelation. Sometimes it is simply absence. A person's inability to stay does not automatically expose your lack of value. Their silence does not become proof that your heart was unworthy of being answered. Distance may reveal the limit of the connection, the limit of their capacity, or the truth of a mismatch. It does not reveal the full measure of your being. That distinction has to become firm. Without it, every ending becomes an attack on identity. Every person who leaves seems to confirm the same fear. Every unanswered message becomes evidence in a case against yourself. Over time, pain does not remain tied to one experience. It becomes a story about who you are. That story can become more damaging than the loss itself. It follows you forward. You enter new connections already afraid of being abandoned. You over-explain because you fear being misunderstood. Standards begin to lower quietly, not because you want less, but because part of you believes asking for more will drive people away. You become grateful for small signs of attention because a deeper place inside doubts whether you deserve consistency. This is how one person's absence can train you to accept less in the future. Do not let that happen. Let the loss teach you, but do not let it reduce you. There may be things to examine. Perhaps you moved too quickly. Perhaps you ignored discomfort because hope felt warmer than honesty. Maybe you gave someone more authority than their conduct deserved. A mature person does not use self-worth as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Still, responsibility is different from self-condemnation. Responsibility looks at your part so you can grow. Self-condemnation turns the whole ending into proof that you are defective. The first one gives power back to you. The second one hands power to the wound. A painful ending often contains many causes. Two people bring histories, fears, expectations, habits, timing, emotional capacity, and limitations. The relationship becomes a meeting place for all of that. Reducing the ending to "I was not enough" may feel emotionally familiar, but it is usually too small to be true. Life is rarely that simple. Some people cannot receive love without fear. Others enjoy closeness until closeness asks for responsibility. There are those who admire depth but cannot remain present inside it. Certain connections are sincere yet unstable because sincerity alone is not the same as readiness. You may have been offering something real to someone who did not know how to hold it. That is painful. It is not the same as being worthless. The Stoic perspective helps here because it returns attention to the right place. You cannot control whether another person sees your value clearly. Recognition is not fully in your hands. Neither is loyalty, emotional maturity, timing, or someone else's courage. What remains within your power is the meaning you allow their behavior to have over your life. If you treat their absence as a final judgment, you give them authority they may not have earned. Perhaps they did not even understand you clearly. Perhaps they were divided inside themselves. Perhaps their choice came from fear, confusion, immaturity, or a life moving in another direction. Why should such a choice become the court where your entire value is decided? It should not. You can grieve without surrendering the truth of yourself. That means speaking inwardly with care. After loss, the voice inside you matters more than most people realize. If that voice becomes cruel, the wound deepens. Calling yourself stupid, unlovable, disposable, or impossible to keep will not make you heal faster. It will only make you more desperate for someone else to disprove the cruelty. Be honest, but do not become brutal. Honesty may admit, I cared deeply. It may recognize, I gave more attention than the situation could hold. There can be room for the painful truth, I wanted this person to choose me, and they did not. None of that requires the conclusion, therefore I am not worth choosing. That conclusion is the poison. Remove it from the wound. Once it is removed, grief becomes simpler. Still sad, perhaps, still tender, but no longer mixed with shame. You can mourn the connection without turning the ending into an identity. You can miss someone without kneeling before their absence, as if it knows the whole truth about you. The person who did not stay is not the final witness of your worth. One person's capacity is not the universe's verdict. A failed connection is not a failed self. These distinctions are not empty comfort. They are necessary for sane judgment. If you do not make them, the mind will make crueler ones in their place. Pain often searches for a reason, and the easiest target is the self. Blaming yourself can feel strangely useful because it creates the illusion of control. If the loss happened because you were not enough, then perhaps becoming enough can prevent future loss. But that path never ends. There is always another imagined improvement, another impossible version of you, another standard invented by fear. You do not heal by becoming perfect enough that no one can leave. You heal by becoming grounded enough that someone leaving does not make you abandon yourself. That is the real work. A person may leave and still your life remains worthy of care. Someone may fail to recognize what you offered, and still you can keep offering honesty, depth, kindness, and steadiness in places where they are met with respect. The fact that one connection did not hold does not mean your capacity for connection is broken. It may mean your discernment needs sharpening. That is different. Sharper discernment asks better questions. Does this person show consistency or only intensity? Is there mutual effort, or am I carrying the emotional weight alone? Do I feel peaceful with them, or addicted to relief after uncertainty? Are my needs welcome here, or do I keep hiding them to preserve closeness? These questions help you grow without hating yourself. They turn pain into guidance. A verdict ends the conversation. Guidance opens a path forward. Choose guidance. If the absence showed you that you give too much too quickly, learn pacing. When the silence revealed how deeply you depend on reassurance, build steadier self-trust. If the ending exposed a habit of idealizing potential, practice respecting patterns more than possibilities. These lessons strengthen you without reducing you. That is the kind of growth pain can create when it is not poisoned by shame. One day, their absence may still be part of your story, but it will no longer be the chapter where your value was decided. It will become a place where you learned how dangerous it is to hand your worth to someone else's choices. A painful place, yes, but not the final one. There is a future version of you who does not need this person's return in order to feel whole. That version may not feel close yet. Move toward it anyway, not through denial, through conduct. Care for your body while the heart is heavy. Protect your attention when the old wound asks for evidence. Keep standards that fear wants to lower. Speak to yourself as someone responsible for healing, not someone sentenced by rejection. The proof of your worth will not arrive all at once. It will gather. In the way you stop chasing what humiliates you. In the way you refuse to let longing make you smaller. In the quiet strength of building a life that does not need their absence to change before it can begin again. Then the pain starts to lose its authority. Not because you stopped feeling, but because feeling no longer controls the meaning. You can finally admit, they left, or they changed, or they could not meet me. That hurt. And still, my worth did not leave with them. This is not a sentence you repeat to sound strong. It is a truth you practice until the heart can finally believe it. Their absence may explain something about the relationship. It may reveal something about timing. It may expose a pattern you needed to see. But it is not the final measurement of your value. Never give an ending that much power. Pain does not become wisdom simply because it hurts. A wound can repeat itself for years and still teach nothing if the mind only uses it as proof of damage. Suffering alone does not refine a person. Time alone does not guarantee maturity. The same ache can return under different names, in different relationships, with different faces, if the pattern beneath it remains unseen. This is why the question must eventually change. Not only why did this happen, but what did this reveal? That shift is important. The first question often keeps attention fixed on the event. The second begins to uncover the structure beneath it. A painful connection is rarely just about one person. It can expose the way you attach, the way you hope, the way you ignore discomfort, the way you negotiate against your own needs, when the fear of losing someone becomes stronger than your commitment to yourself. At first, this kind of examination may feel harsh. It is not meant to be. There is a difference between blaming yourself for the wound and studying the pattern that made the wound possible. Blame looks backward with cruelty. Study looks backward with responsibility. One traps you inside shame, the other gives you material for change. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That line belongs here because attachment often feels like fate while it is happening. You may believe this person has a unique power over you. Their absence feels destined to hurt. Their silence feels impossible to resist. The longing appears larger than choice, but sometimes what feels like fate is a pattern operating from beneath awareness. Maybe the person was not the only reason you became attached. Perhaps they touched an old place in you, a place that learned to chase affection when it became uncertain, a place that confuses emotional intensity with importance, a place that feels valuable only when someone is warm, attentive, or difficult to win. A place that mistakes anxiety for chemistry because peace has not always felt familiar. This does not make the feeling false, it makes it layered. A connection can be real and still activate something older than itself. The current person may have opened a door, but the room behind that door may have been built long before they arrived. That is why some losses feel larger than the relationship can explain. They do not only hurt the present, they awaken unfinished material from the past. If you do not recognize that, the pattern will keep disguising itself as love. The next person may look different. The beginning may feel new. The conversations may have another rhythm. Still, the same inner movement can return. The quick emotional investment, the waiting, the interpreting, the willingness to accept uncertainty because losing the possibility feels unbearable. A different story begins, yet the old wound quietly writes the script. This is where pain can become useful. Not because it was good, because it finally made the hidden pattern visible. Maybe this experience has shown you that you attach to potential more than presence. The person does not need to offer consistency. The possibility of who they might become becomes enough to keep you emotionally invested. A few beautiful moments start outweighing the actual pattern. You fall in love not only with what is there, but with what could be there if everything finally improved. That is a pattern worth seeing. Another possibility is that you gave too much authority to ambiguity. Instead of requiring clarity, you learned to survive on hints. A message, a look, a partial return, a moment of warmth after distance. Each one became enough to restart hope. The connection never needed to become stable because your mind kept turning small signs into emotional proof. That also deserves attention. Perhaps the deeper pattern is self-silencing. You felt a need but did not speak it clearly. Something hurt, but you softened the truth to avoid pressure. You wanted consistency, yet accepted confusion because asking directly might have ended the fantasy. A part of you may have preferred a painful possibility over a clean answer. That is not easy to admit, but it is powerful. A clean answer gives you reality. A possibility lets you keep imagining. Many people remain loyal to uncertainty because uncertainty leaves room for hope. Clarity can feel more painful because it ends the private negotiation. There may also be a pattern around validation. Their attention did not simply make you happy, it made you feel real, chosen, significant. When it disappeared, the pain felt like more than disappointment. It felt like a collapse in self-worth. That tells you something important. The wound may not only be about the person, it may be about where your value has been placed. None of these discoveries should be used to punish yourself. They are not evidence that you are broken. They are invitations to become more conscious. A person who discovers a pattern has been given a chance to stop calling repetition destiny. You cannot change what remains invisible. Once the shape is seen, choice becomes possible. Not perfect choice, not instant freedom, but a little more space between the trigger and the old response. That space matters. The next time someone gives inconsistent warmth, you may notice the pull earlier. Instead of immediately romanticizing the uncertainty, a quieter intelligence begins to ask whether your peace is being disturbed. When a person offers potential without participation, you may feel the old attraction, but you also recognize the cost. The old wound still moves, but it no longer moves without being seen. This is how pain becomes training, not by making you harder, by making you more awake. Hardness is often just pain that never became wisdom. It closes the heart and calls itself protection. Awareness works differently. It allows tenderness to remain, but adds discernment. You can still love. You can still hope. You can still feel deeply. The difference is that feeling no longer removes your ability to see. That is the maturity this experience may be asking from you, to stop confusing depth with losing yourself, to stop treating longing as evidence that someone belongs in your life, to stop allowing uncertainty to become a place where your dignity waits indefinitely. These are not small lessons. They are foundations for a different future, a future where you do not need pain to become extreme before you listen to yourself. A future where the first signs of anxiety are not ignored because the connection feels beautiful. A future where your heart can open without handing away the authority of your own judgment. The person who left may never understand this part of your healing. They may never know the pattern they helped reveal. They may never see how much you had to examine after they were gone. That does not matter as much as it once might have. The lesson does not need their witness to be real. It only needs your honesty. When the memory returns now, try not to ask only whether they miss you. Ask what the attachment has been teaching you. What did it expose about your fears? What did it reveal about your standards? Which needs did you ignore? Which signs did you explain away? Where did you trade peace for possibility? These questions are not meant to keep you in the past. They are meant to make the past useful enough that you can leave it. A wound without a lesson becomes repetition. A wound with a lesson becomes direction. You may not be grateful for what happened. You do not have to be. Some experiences hurt without needing to be decorated. Still, you can decide that the pain will not remain meaningless. You can take from it a sharper eye, a steadier center, and a more honest relationship with yourself. That is how suffering begins to lose its waste. It becomes material, not for bitterness, for discernment. And once the pattern becomes visible, another stage becomes possible, letting go of the idea that healing means deleting the memory. Freedom is not the absence of remembrance. It is the moment remembrance no longer has authority over your life. Letting go does not mean the memory disappears. That misunderstanding creates unnecessary suffering. Many people believe they have not healed because they still remember. A face returns. A moment rises. A certain day, song, place, or phrase brings back the old feeling. The mind notices the memory and immediately becomes discouraged, as if the presence of remembrance means no progress has been made. But memory is not failure. The human mind does not erase what mattered simply because the chapter has ended. Certain people leave marks. Important experiences do not vanish on command. A connection can be over and still remain part of your inner history. Expecting complete erasure may only turn healing into another impossible demand. The real question is different. Not, do I still remember? But, what happens to me when I remember? That is where progress becomes visible. At one stage, the memory enters and takes the whole room. Your mood changes, the body tightens, the day bends around the ache. A single thought becomes an hour of replaying, imagining, interpreting, and returning to the same emotional place. The memory does not behave like memory. It behaves like a command. Later, if healing is beginning, the same memory may still appear, but its authority is smaller. It passes through rather than taking possession. It brings sadness perhaps, but not collapse. A tender ache may remain, yet the mind does not automatically build a story around it. You can feel the past without relocating your life there. That is freedom, not forgetting. Freedom. A memory loses its power when it no longer decides your behavior. You do not check because it appeared. You do not reopen the wound because it visited. You do not interpret the present through it. You do not abandon your body, your work, your friendships, or your peace every time it knocks. This is a more realistic form of healing. It allows you to remain human. A colder version of strength would try to cut everything out. It would treat remembrance as weakness and tenderness as danger. That may look strong from a distance, but often it is only fear dressed as control. The Stoic path is not emotional amputation, it is self-command. There is a difference. Self-command does not require the heart to become empty. It requires the heart to stop obeying every wave as if the wave were law. Grief can rise without becoming your identity. Longing can pass through without becoming your direction. A memory can sit beside you for a moment without being allowed to drive. That is a mature relationship with the past. You no longer need to hate it to survive it. You no longer need to worship it to honor it. You no longer need to erase it to become free. The past becomes part of you without becoming the owner of you. This shift is subtle, but it changes the emotional weight of everything. The memory of their warmth can remain beautiful without becoming an argument against the present. The sadness of the ending can remain real without becoming proof that life will never offer meaning again. You can remember what you felt and still understand that feeling deeply does not require staying attached forever. Some chapters are meant to be carried as wisdom, not reopened as possibility. That distinction matters. Possibility keeps looking for a future inside the past. Wisdom takes the lesson and turns toward what can still be shaped. Possibility asks the memory to continue the story. Wisdom lets the memory complete its work and settle into its place. A settled memory feels different. It may still be tender. It may still bring a pause. But it no longer demands movement toward the person. It does not ask you to wait, check, prove, explain, or compare everyone else to them. The emotional hook has weakened. What remains is quieter, a recognition that something happened, something mattered, something changed you, and life continued. That sentence may not sound dramatic. It is powerful because it is true. Much of healing is the slow return to proportion. At first, one person can seem larger than the whole future. One ending can seem larger than the whole life. One silence can seem louder than every voice still present. Attachment exaggerates scale. It makes a chapter feel like the entire book. Healing restores size. The person becomes human again. The connection becomes one part of your story. The memory becomes a room you can visit briefly, not a house you live inside. The present becomes visible again, not because the past was meaningless, but because it is no longer blocking everything else. Marcus Aurelius often returned to the present as the only place where life can actually be lived. To remain trapped in what has already passed is to spend strength where action is no longer possible. The memory may deserve respect, but your power does not live there anymore. Your power lives in how you meet this moment, how you speak to yourself today, what you feed with attention, which boundary you honor, what kind of person you become because of what happened. This is where the past becomes useful instead of dominant. It informs your standards. It sharpens your discernment. It teaches you the cost of self-abandonment. It helps you recognize the difference between mutual love and emotional waiting. But it no longer sits in the center, demanding that everything revolve around it. You may still have days when the memory feels strong. That does not undo the work. Healing is not a straight line. Certain seasons carry old echoes. A familiar place may reopen something for a moment. Loneliness may make the past appear warmer than it was. None of this means you have returned to the beginning. It only means the mind is touching something once meaningful. Meet those moments with steadiness. No panic, no self-attack, no dramatic conclusion that you have failed. A memory appeared. Let it appear. A feeling came with it. Let the feeling move. Then return. The return is the practice. Every time you return, you teach the mind that remembrance is not a command. This is how authority changes hands. The past may knock. You decide whether it enters. If it enters, you decide how long it stays. If it brings a lesson, you receive it. If it only brings the old loop, you let it leave. That is not rejection of what mattered. It is responsible stewardship of your inner life. You are allowed to decide that a memory has taken enough. You are allowed to protect the present from becoming a museum of old pain. You are allowed to carry tenderness without turning it into waiting. Some people fear that this kind of freedom will make them less loving. It will not. It may make the love cleaner. When desperation fades, you can see what happened with more honesty. Gratitude becomes possible without dependence. Sadness becomes possible without obsession. You can wish someone well without secretly asking them to restore your life. That is emotional maturity, not indifference. Maturity allows the past to be meaningful without demanding its return. It can say, "This person touched my life, but they do not own my life. This memory shaped me, but it does not command me. This chapter mattered, but it is not the whole book." When you reach that place, peace feels quieter than you expected. It does not arrive like victory over them. It feels more like the end of an inner argument. The mind no longer needs to prove the connection meant something by bleeding every time it appears. The heart no longer confuses release with betrayal. The body begins to understand that it can be safe even when the memory is present. That is when remembrance becomes gentle again, not always happy, but no longer violent. The image returns and you remain. The ache rises and you remain. A question passes through, and you remain. Nothing outside you has to change for you to stay rooted. This is the strength you are trying to reach all along, not the strength of forgetting, the strength of remembering without being taken. And once that strength begins to form, the final movement becomes possible. Returning fully to the present before the past becomes the place where your life keeps disappearing. The past can become a home if you visit it too often, not a peaceful home, a familiar one. There is a difference. Familiar pain can feel strangely safe because you already know its rooms. You know the memories. You know the questions. You know the ache that comes at night, the imagination that tries to repair everything, the hope that appears when the present feels too plain. Even when it hurts, the old story has a rhythm. The present is less predictable. It asks you to live without the person at the center. It asks you to build meaning without the imagined future. It asks you to meet yourself without the distraction of waiting. That can feel empty at first, and the mind may interpret the emptiness as proof that life has become smaller. But emptiness is not always the absence of meaning. Sometimes it is the space left behind after obsession begins to move out. You need that space. Without it, nothing new can enter. A life crowded with one old story has little room for fresh purpose. New experiences may arrive, but they struggle to reach you because part of your attention is still living elsewhere. People speak, opportunities appear, mornings begin, but the inner gaze remains turned toward what has already passed. The present cannot become meaningful while it is treated as a waiting room. That is the final lesson. Your life is not what happens after they return, explain, regret, apologize, or finally understand. Your life is already happening. It is happening in the days you spend looking backward. It is happening in the body that keeps carrying you through grief. It is happening in the work you postpone, the friendships you half enter, the habits that weaken when attention stays loyal to absence. The present does not shout for your attention the way longing does. It is quieter. A glass of water, a task completed, a room cleaned, a walk taken without checking, a conversation with someone who is actually there, a morning where you do not begin by reopening the same wound. These things may not feel as emotionally intense as the old attachment, but they are where life rebuilds itself. Do not underestimate ordinary reality. The mind addicted to longing often wants intensity. It wants signs, meanings, dramatic returns, final conversations, emotional proof. The present offers something less theatrical and more durable. Ground, a place to stand, a place to act, a place where your choices still matter. The Stoic returns to this ground again and again, not because the past has no value, but because action no longer lives there. You cannot repair yesterday by staring at it endlessly. You cannot force another person's heart to become clear through private suffering. You cannot build your future inside a memory, no matter how beautiful that memory once felt. What remains within your power is closer. The next honest decision, the next disciplined act, the next refusal to feed the loop, the next return to your own life. This may sound small, but life is built from these small returns. A person does not reclaim the present in one dramatic gesture. The return happens quietly, through repeated loyalty to what is real. You bring your attention back from the imagined conversation. You stop making your peace wait for a message. You choose care for the self who remains, even while missing the one who left. At first, the present may not feel like enough. That is normal. You have been comparing it to a fantasy, and fantasy is hard to compete with. Fantasy can be perfect because it has no responsibility. The present has dishes, deadlines, tiredness, imperfect people, uncertain mornings, and the slow work of healing. It may not glow immediately. Let it be plain for a while. Plain does not mean empty. Plain can become peaceful. A quiet day can become a blessing once the nervous system stops needing emotional storms to feel alive. A simple routine can become a form of dignity. A life without constant waiting may feel dull at first, then slowly begin to feel like freedom. Stay long enough to notice the difference. This is where many people turn back too soon. The old story feels intense, so they mistake it for depth. The present feels ordinary, so they assume it has nothing to offer. But intensity is not always truth. Sometimes it is only the nervous system recognizing an old pattern. Peace may arrive without drama. Do not reject it because it is quiet. The person you cannot stop thinking about may always remain part of your story. That does not have to be a tragedy. Some people become chapters that teach us what we could not have learned in comfort. They reveal how deeply we can feel, where we abandon ourselves, what kind of love we long for, and where our worth must never be placed again. A chapter can be important without being final. The past may have shaped you, but it does not have to keep directing you. The memory may remain, but it does not need to sit in the center. The connection may have awakened something real, but that does not mean your life must stop at the place where it disappeared. There is more road. Even if you cannot feel it yet, sometimes the next life does not announce itself with excitement. It begins as one small act of presence. You answer the day instead of the memory. You make the meal. You finish the work. You breathe through the wave instead of obeying it. You let the phone remain untouched. You choose one thing that belongs to your future rather than your longing. That is how the future returns. Not as a grand vision, as participation. You begin participating in your own life again, and with that participation, the old attachment slowly loses its throne. It may still visit, but it no longer governs. It may still hurt, but it no longer defines the day. What once felt like the center becomes one part of a much larger life. That larger life is what you are returning to, not a life where nothing hurts. A life where pain is no longer the ruler, not a life where the memory disappears. A life where the memory has a proper place, not a life where love becomes meaningless. A life where love no longer requires self-abandonment. This is the quiet freedom Stoicism points toward. Not control over who stays, who leaves, who understands, or who returns. Control over whether your own soul remains abandoned in the aftermath. Control over the meanings you continue to feed. Control over the direction of your attention, your conduct, your character, and your next step. That is enough to begin again. The past may still call sometimes. Let it call. You do not have to answer every time. A memory may open an old door. You can look without entering. Longing may offer you the same imagined future. You can feel its pull and still remain where your life actually is. Here, this breath, this room, this day, this self who has survived more than it thought it could. You are not required to hate what is gone in order to return to what remains. There is a gentler way. You can bow to the past without living under it. You can admit that someone mattered without giving them the rest of your life. You can carry the lesson, release the waiting, and walk forward with a heart that is not closed, only wiser. That is the real ending. Not the moment you stop remembering them, the moment you stop leaving yourself every time you remember. If this reflection helped you see your own heart more clearly, like the video and write in the comments, "I return to myself." Because the past may always be a chapter of your life, but it was never meant to become the whole book.